Okay, hey everybody, Dan here. Look, I'm going to be gone for a couple weeks. I'm leaving tomorrow, going over to Italy. Going to try some of their pasta at a big high mountaintop. So I'm not going to be around, but Scott McGregor has my back. So does Andy Kwong, our options guru. But I'm going to leave you with this. Google. It's kind of a biggie here. So I want to show you my screen. Let's see if we can find a trade for you while I'm gone. Now, this company reports earnings in a week on the 22nd, but look at the way this is set up here. Stock's been trending sideways, one big, huge down day. And guess what? That marked the low. See that all the time. A stock that's drifting lower and lower and lower. And then finally, one day you go like, oh my God, this thing's going straight to zero. Look at the volume. And sure enough, that's the end of it, the last of the Mohicans, and then the stock starts to run up. And that's what we've seen here. It's what we saw right here. Kind of tough to buy it here. And maybe even here you say, well, I've seen that before. Uh, Interesting. Above the 20. Okay, well, maybe it's going back down now. And then sure enough, this thing just keeps popping, right? And then finally, bam, we're getting this. So even though this is still below the 50-day moving average, I just like the way this is trading. I like the fact that it's trading on higher than average volume. And you can say, well, what do you mean higher than average volume? I mean, if I reduce this, say, to 5 days, it works. You could say, well, why are you reducing it to 5 days? Well, I'll tell you why. Because volume's really, really spiky here. And if I'm going to take 112 million shares into account on one day, that's going to really skew the volume. Same thing here. Plus, all of this red, okay, these are skyscrapers. This is the highest, these are the highest buildings on the block. Um, if they're in New York, they're probably maintained like hell and the landlords are leaving. But that's just me opining. But what we see here with this type of thing is you see all of this massive selling, and then it kind of stops. It starts to drift lower. And when this occurs, what it really does day after day is make these big skyscrapers less relevant. They just kind of don't matter as much. And so when I see this, I see a stock that's going higher. So this would be my suggestion. Okay, the stock is up at a high of 373.65. We'll do it this way. 373.68. Okay, let's give it 3 pennies. All right, so if the stock runs above this level, this is when I'd be a buyer. And if you are a buyer, then what you do is you put your stop. This is a really, really tight trade. You put your stop right here. Okay. Right there is where you put your stop. So you're in a really tight trade and you're anticipating this kind of move. Okay. So that's what I got for you. One other thing, if you're not a member of Stock Market Mentor, and we've had quite a few people hopping on board lately, which is really, really gratifying to me. Hey, it's why we do what we do. But I want you to get over there. It's $7 for 14 days. If you haven't tried it, look, it's $7. That's a cup of crappy coffee at Starbucks these days, and probably creams extra. So why don't you get over there? I'm gone for a couple weeks, but I'll tell you this. All right, just letting you know. When I'm back, I better see you there. All right. All right. See you guys next time.